Welcome to Lesson 7.10, Managing Disaster Recovery Plan Maintenance. In your Candidate Information Bulletin, we are in the Security Operations domain. We are in Key Area of Knowledge M, which is Test Disaster Recovery Plans. Our lesson topics are going to include a disaster recovery plan lifecycle, maintenance, and then types of testing, including read-throughs, walkthroughs, simulation, parallel, and full-scale testing. And then we'll conclude with talking about plan auditing. So in the last lesson, we talked about disaster response and recovery planning. In this lesson, we want to look at the life cycle of the plan itself. So we start with a BIA. Remember, that's really always going to be the foundation of all of our plans. We have our BIA so that we can set our priorities. We also assess our current environment from there. We have to select and define our strategies. So from our BIA, we assess the current environment, we select and define our strategies, then we move into developing our specific plans and procedures. Now we've got our plan all built, we need to train our users, and then we need to exercise the plan, meaning we need to test the plan to ensure that it's working as expected, and we want to test the plan to make sure that everybody is comfortable with and familiar with both the plan components and strategy and their roles and responsibilities. So we're going to go through an exercise. So again, we're starting with our BIA, assessing our current environment to make sure that it meets the BIA requirements, selecting and defining strategies based on our BIA requirements and, of course, management approval. We'll develop our plans and procedures, we'll train our users, and then we're going to exercise. Then there's going to be a continual process of updating the plan, and we're going to have to update the plan either based on what we've learned from our exercises and also because we're always going to be integrating new systems into our environment. And one of the things that should always be integrated in a new system life cycle right from the very beginning is assessing the criticality of that system so that we can design the appropriate resiliency, redundancy, data backup strategies, or perhaps even replication strategies. And based on those new systems, we're going to have to, again, select and define strategies, develop plans and procedures, train users, and exercise the plan for the new system. Of course, the new system will also impact our business impact analysis. So we're going to have really a very iterative process like everything else that we've looked at. And then we want to also make sure that the plan is getting audited. Now the plan should be audited by an independent group that could be external or internal to ensure that 1, we have a plan, 2, that it's accurate and complete, and 3, that we're meeting our milestones for training and exercising. So we're going to take a look at some of these stages. First is just maintenance of the plan itself. So the disaster recovery plan should be maintained in a state of readiness, which includes personnel trained to fulfill their roles and responsibilities within the plan, plans and strategies exercised to validate their content, and systems and system components tested on a scheduled basis to ensure their recovery and operability. And lastly, our plan examination and auditing to ensure compliance with our business objectives. An important component of our plan lifecycle are doing disaster recovery exercises and tests. But we want to make sure that we approach our exercises and tests in a very planned and methodical way. So exercise and testing plans should include the scope, what's going to be included, our objectives, what are we trying to accomplish, our methodology, what type of test or exercise are we going to use, our scenario, what is the situation, our participants, who's going to participate, our decision maker of our participants, who will be our leaders, how much time we're going to allow, our logistics, what do we need to do the test or where is the test going to be held, what resources do we need to conduct the test, are there any constraints, and the test criteria. Now, the objective of our disaster recovery exercise and tests should be to evaluate the strategies, the plans, and the procedures, not institutional knowledge. So we're not going to be depending on what people know what to do or think they should do. We really want to look back and say, are we following our strategies, our plans, and our procedures? So the outcome of a disaster recovery exercise or test should be strategy, plan, and procedure modification, if necessary, and an enhanced participant familiarity with all facets of the plan that they're being exposed to. So there are 5 standard exercise and tests, sometimes tests are called drills, methodologies. They are a read-through, also referred to as a checklist, a walkthrough, also referred to as a tabletop, a simulation, a parallel test, and a full interruption. So we're going to talk through each one of those 5 options. Starting with read-through, walkthrough, and simulation. So read-through, walkthrough, and simulation exercises are passive, meaning they don't have an operational impact. A read-through exercise requires each functional area to review their plans and procedures for accuracy and completeness. So in a read-through, we're going to be tasking the functional area or department with reviewing their plans and procedures to make sure that they are accurate and complete. A walkthrough exercise is conducted as a group workshop. Various scenarios are presented and reviewed, and the focus is on the application of plans and procedures to that scenario, as well as participant readiness. So a scenario is provided, the group has to determine what are the applicable plans and procedures, and make sure that everyone understands how to implement and use those plans and procedures. In a simulation exercise, we bring together a cross-functional team, so not just a department or a functional area, but we bring together a cross-functional group. It is based on a specific scenario, so we're not going through a number of scenarios. We have a very specific, usually defined and fairly detailed scenario. It does involve role-playing, and it limits the material and equipment available to what would be available if the scenario was an actual event. So again, in a simulation, we're bringing together cross-functional groups, multiple departments. We have one in-depth scenario. We are going to ask people to role-play, play the role that they would in the disaster situation, and what they can use, the materials and the equipment, will be limited to what's available to them as if this was a real disaster. So read-through, functional areas review their plans. A walkthrough is a group workshop reviewing various scenarios and focusing on the application of the plans and procedures as well as participant readiness. And a simulation is really, think of it as a role-playing game. We're really just addressing an in-depth scenario. We're going to role-play. We're going to use just the materials and equipment available to us if this was a real scenario. Parallel and full interruption testing are active. Parallel, sometimes called functional testing, is the activation of backup systems and/or the recovery of primary systems. Now, generally, parallel tests are component, device, or system level. Depending upon the scenario and the criteria, primary systems may remain active or primary systems may go offline, and the organization may begin depending upon the recovery system or the backup system. A full interruption or full-scale testing simulates an actual event, and it does require activation of relocation and recovery strategies and procedures. Full interruption or full-scale testing is unusual for an organization, and generally, if they are held, they're going to be held on a non-work day, perhaps a weekend or a holiday, to minimize the impact on production or on customer service. Our exercise and testing reports should include the outcome of the exercise, any identified plan or procedure weaknesses or missing elements, recommended modifications, and an assigned to-do list. And we want to make sure that our disaster recovery plan really is accurate and complete, and that's where audit comes in. DR plan audit objectives should include the verification and the validation that our plans are up to date, as well as our procedures and our supporting documentation, that our plan conforms with all of our regulatory requirements, our contractual obligations, and any service level agreements that the organization may have to their partners, that our disaster recovery plan has been reviewed and authorized by executive management, that all of our plan responsibilities are assigned and understood, and that plan and procedures have been exercised, the results documented, and the appropriate modifications made. And lastly, that our third-party contracts match our plan requirements. So if we have any dependencies on third parties, we want to ensure that that's written into the contract so that we can rely on our third parties. So that brings us to our Lesson 7.10 review. We started with looking at the disaster recovery plan life cycle. We talked about the importance of plan maintenance. We looked at different types of exercises and tests, including a read-through, a walk-through, and a simulation, all of which are passive, and then a parallel test and a full-scale test, both of which are active, and the importance to have our plan audited on a regular basis so that we have the assurance that it is complete and accurate and that we have done our testing, it's been authorized by management, and everybody's well aware of their roles and responsibilities, we're meeting all of our contractual and regulatory obligations, and that our third parties are available to provide the services that we are going to rely upon. So that brings us to a pretty easy Lesson 7.10 Match the Meaning. There are just 5 terms. Those are all of our exercises and tests that you need to be familiar with: a read-through, a walk-through, a simulation, a parallel, and a full-scale exercise. You should be able to do these no sweat. So take a minute, put me on pause, match the meaning, come on back, and we'll do them together. All right, so let's go through our 5 Lesson 7.10 terms. A read-through exercise is a departmental level review. A walk-through exercise focuses on participant readiness. That's when we're looking at various scenarios, making sure we can pull out the right procedures and make sure our participants are ready. A simulation is role-playing, scenario-based workshop. Parallel is the recovery or activation of discrete systems. Generally, we're not bringing everything down. We're saying we're going to do a recovery or activation of certain backup systems, or we're going to recover specific primary systems. And a full-scale exercise is conducted as an actual event. So make sure you're familiar with read-through, walk-through, simulation, parallel, and full-scale exercise. And we'll end with our CISSP exam tips. Reminder that DR plans need to be continually reviewed and updated. This is an iterative process. That exercises over time should be scheduled with increasing complexity. If you're responsible for designing the exercise kind of year over year, let's make them a little bit more difficult and more challenging. And lastly, that DR plans and procedures and our ancillary documents may contain sensitive information and do need to be secured. So thanks for joining me for this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next.